15 workers died in 17 seconds. BP had years of warnings. On March 23, 2005, a massive hydrocarbon release and subsequent vapor cloud explosion decimated a section of the BP Texas City site. The refinery, located southeast of Houston, was the company's largest worldwide. It spanned 1,200 acres and processed 10 million gallons of gasoline per day. The resulting destruction remains a permanent record of the catastrophic cost of systemic safety failures.
The explosion at the BP Texas City Refinery was one of the worst industrial disasters in recent U.S. history, resulting in 15 fatalities and 180 injuries. 66 workers were injured seriously enough to require days away from work or extensive medical treatment, suffering combinations of fractures, severe lacerations, and third-degree burns. The sheer force of the blast mandated a shelter-in-place order for 43,000 people in the surrounding community, and the blast overpressure shattered windows in homes and businesses up to 3/4 of a mile away.
The investigation identified severe facility siting errors that placed the workforce directly inside the blast radius. At the time of the incident, approximately 800 contractor workers were on site supporting maintenance turnaround work. BP Texas City facility siting practices allowed temporary structures, specifically wood-framed office trailers, to be placed near hazardous process areas without adequate hazard evaluation or management of change procedures.
Temporary office trailers were placed dangerously close to the process unit, squarely within the zone of destruction. The trailers were located between 140 to 240 feet from the ISOM unit blowdown drum. Blast modeling and post-incident analysis indicate that these temporary structures experienced approximately 2 to 2.5 psi of blast overpressure. At this distance and pressure, wood-frame trailers suffered complete structural failure, instantly creating lethal internal debris hazards and flying window blasts. The placement of these trailers proved fatal for the contractors occupying them when the vapor cloud ignited. The Chemical Safety Board final report documents on page 22, the 15 employees killed in the explosion were contractors working in and around temporary trailers that had been previously cited by BP as close as 121 feet, 37 meters, from the blowdown drum. All 15 fatalities occurred among workers occupying these structures or immediately adjacent to them.
The root of the mechanical and operational failures traces back to the morning startup of the ISO unit. The ISO, or isomerization unit, upgraded low-octane structural components into higher-octane unleaded gasoline blending feedstocks. The disaster initiated in the raffinate splitter section, which utilized a 170-foot-tall distillation tower to separate non-aromatic hydrocarbons.
A chronological reconstruction details a series of critical events, beginning with the filling of the raffinate splitter tower before dawn and ending in catastrophic failure. At 2:15 a.m., the night lead operator began filling the tower. By 3:09 a.m., the tower high-level alarm sounded as the liquid level reached 7.6 feet. Crucially, a redundant high-level alarm switch failed to activate when the level passed 7.9 feet. At 9:51 a.m., startup operations recommenced, and the tower began receiving continuous feed. At 11:50 a.m., fuel to the furnace was increased. At this point, the actual liquid level in the tower was 98 feet, though control board instruments falsely indicated a level of only 8.4 feet. A critical deviation from operating procedures caused the tower to dangerously overfill with feed. The investigation report states, on page 21, during the startup, operations personnel pumped flammable liquid hydrocarbons into the tower for over 3 hours without any liquid being removed, which was contrary to startup procedure instructions. Between 9:51 a.m. and 12:59 p.m., the dayboard operator maintained the feed rate at roughly 20,500 barrels per day, yet the heavy raffinate level control valve at the bottom of the tower remained closed. As the 170-foot-tall tower filled, hydrostatic head pressure rapidly escalated to 64 psi, forcing open the emergency relief valves. The actual level of liquid inside the tower eventually reached 158 feet. This immense column of liquid created severe hydrostatic head pressure. The 147 feet of liquid descending the overhead piping generated approximately 42 pounds per square inch of pressure at the base of the pipe. When combined with the 22 pounds per square inch of normal vapor pressure inside the tower, the total pressure against the relief valve spiked to 64 psi. The ensuing pressure spike overwhelmed the relief system, discharging highly volatile liquid directly into the disposal header. The 3 safety relief valves were set to open at 40, 41, and 42 psi.
Control system data indicates the first valve opened at exactly 1:13:56 p.m., followed by the second at 1:14:10 p.m., and the third just 4 seconds later at 1:14:14 p.m.
The overwhelmed relief valves directed the hazardous liquid to a system completely unequipped to safely contain it. The valves discharged the liquid raffinate into a 38-inch disposal collection header, which routed the material to a blowdown drum fitted with a 113-foot-tall stack, vented directly to the open atmosphere. Process modeling determined that 51,930 gallons of flammable hydrocarbon liquid weighing 283,150 pounds flowed from the splitter tower through the valves in just 6 minutes.
The liquid flooded an obsolete blowdown drum, resulting in a geyser-like release of flammable hydrocarbons directly into the atmosphere. The CSB report notes on page 21, this blowdown system was an antiquated and unsafe design. It was originally installed in the 1950s and had never been connected to a flare system to safely contain liquids and combust flammable vapors released from the process. The drum rapidly overfilled, shooting a fountain of volatile liquid from the top of the stack. The liquid fell to the ground, evaporating into a highly concentrated, low-lying flammable vapor cloud. At 1:20 p.m., this cloud was ignited by a backfire from an idling diesel pickup truck parked 25 feet from the blowdown drum.
These physical failures were compounded by broken instrumentation and severe human factors, creating a deadly operational blind spot. The dayboard operator was deprived of accurate unit data. Just 1 day prior to the explosion, on March 22nd, a frontline supervisor instructed instrument technicians to stop checking critical alarms because the unit was starting up and there was not enough time to complete the functionality checks. Furthermore, a malfunctioning pressure control valve, known to be inoperable during equipment checks, was left unrepaired prior to the introduction of hydrocarbons.
Corporate staffing reductions and mandatory overtime left the remaining board operators severely exhausted. The final report establishes, on page 23, ISOM operators were likely fatigued from working 12-hour shifts for 29 or more consecutive days. This sustained level of acute sleep loss and cumulative fatigue severely degraded operators' judgment, problem-solving skills, and situational awareness. This physical exhaustion, combined with a malfunctioning level transmitter that falsely indicated a declining liquid level, degraded operator response. At 1:04 p.m., the actual level in the tower was 158 feet. However, the control board transmitter erroneously displayed a reading of 78% of its 9-foot span, amounting to an indicated level of just 7.9 feet. Post-incident inspection revealed that the float inside the high-level switch was physically defective. It was filled with water, sediment, and a degraded hydrocarbon mixture, preventing the alarm from warning operators of the imminent overflow.
The roots of the Texas City disaster extend beyond the control room, originating in corporate mandates that prioritize cost-cutting over process safety. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, total maintenance spending at the refinery was reduced by 41%. Executive directives aggressively drove fixed cash costs out of the system at an accelerated pace, eliminating training programs, maintenance staff, and vital process hazard analyses. Severe financial constraints degraded the facility's ability to maintain safe operations and replace aging infrastructure. Documented on page 158 of the CSB report, the refinery's capital expenditures to maintain safe plant operation and to comply with HSE legal requirements were cut $33 million, or 45%, from 1998 to 1999. A 2002 internal study explicitly warned that the integrity and reliability issues at Texas City were directly linked to these reductions in maintenance spending over the previous decade. Executive mandates for continuous budget reductions directly compromise the mechanical integrity of the entire plant. As cited on page 20, BP targeted budget cuts of 25% in 1999 and another 25% in 2005, even though much of the refinery's infrastructure and process equipment were in disrepair. To meet these financial targets, local management formulated a compliance strategy that explicitly chose to rely on people-dependent operational controls rather than investing in new hardware, deliberately operating within a shrinking margin for error. The systemic financial pressure created an environment where safety compromises became an accepted standard across the organization. The investigation found, as stated on page 158, the prevailing culture at the Texas City refinery was to accept cost reductions without challenge and not to raise concerns when operational integrity was compromised. Budget cuts heavily impacted the training department. Between 1998 and 2004, the learning and development budget was slashed from $2.8 million to $1.4 million, and its staff was reduced from 28 to just 8 personnel.
Process safety audits revealed a systematic failure to address actual risks, replacing genuine oversight with superficial compliance. A 2003 audit highlighted this exact failure, detailed on page 161 of the report. This included going through the motions of checking boxes and inattention to the risk after the checkoff. Critical events, process breaches, and mechanical breakdowns were logged but systematically ignored in practice. The record shows 23 fatalities occurred at the Texas City Refinery in the 30 years prior to the 2005 disaster. In 2004 alone, 3 major incidents at the site caused 3 fatalities. The ISOM unit itself had a documented history of severe near misses. In February 1994, a 115-foot distillation tower overfilled, forcing emergency valves to release large amounts of hydrocarbon vapor from the exact same blowdown system. In August 2004, pressure relief valves in a neighboring unit opened, spewing liquid from the blowdown stack directly onto the ground below. Corporate leadership ignored decades of documented warnings, near misses, and fatal incidents. The official findings state on page 20, despite numerous previous fatalities at the Texas City Refinery, 23 deaths in the 30 years prior to the 2005 disaster, and many hazardous material releases, BP did not take effective steps to stem the growing risk of a catastrophic event. Proposals to replace the atmospheric blowdown stack with a closed flare system were drafted in 1991, 1993, and 2002, but were repeatedly rejected to maintain profits and avoid triggering new environmental performance standards. The failure of safety oversight reached the highest levels of the corporation, setting the absolute conditions for the disaster. Page 25 of the final report concludes, the BP Board of Directors did not provide effective oversight of BP's safety culture and major accident prevention programs. By tracking personal injury rates while ignoring catastrophic process safety risks, corporate leadership maintained a false sense of security, while the physical infrastructure of the plant eroded to the point of structural failure. The destruction at Texas City remains a permanent record of the catastrophic cost of systemic safety failures. Following the explosion, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration assessed over $21 million in fines against BP, citing 301 willful violations. The events of March 23, 2005 demonstrated that when executive mandates prioritize uninterrupted production and aggressive cost reduction over mechanical integrity, catastrophic failure becomes mathematically inevitable. The final toll of 15 lives lost and 180 injured forces a continuing examination of industrial safety margins across the sector. How many more warnings are buried in the budgets of aging infrastructure today?